Attendees will be allowed to post questions in the chat feature. We will be using breakout sessions at the end of the program to share lessons learned. We expect today's webinar to last approximately 1 to 1.5 hours. A little association announcements. To follow the CDC guidelines and local orders, we will continue to have virtual meetings until further notice. Be sure to join us for some of our online programs. Our members-only virtual happy hours are held every Wednesday at 4:30 and hosted by the Member Services Committee. Our Coffee with Crew is held the first Tuesday and the last Thursday at 8:30 a.m. This virtual event is open to non-members who want to learn more about Crew, as well as members. Crew Network is hosting our annual convention online September 15th through the 17th for a nominal fee. I believe it's $3.99 for members. Registration is open, so go ahead and register for that. And we're holding out hope that on October 23rd, we will still be able to have our golf tournament at Avery Ranch. So thank you for our ACE partner, Office Furniture Now, for hosting that event. We want to take this opportunity to remind our members that we're accepting nominations for the Board of Directors, and those nomination forms are due on July 31st. If you're interested, talk to me and I will get you hooked up with that. We also are encouraging a donation to our philanthropic arm of Crew Network Foundation. Currently, 26 of our members have donated, and we'd like to reach 50%. Any amount is appreciated. Crew Foundation supports our college scholarships, industry research, and career outreach. You can find details on our website. I'm happy to announce today's feature partner is Untitled. Please welcome Roxanne Ford, who will speak on their behalf. Roxanne, you're muted.
Actually,
I'm Jenny. Sorry,
I'm Jenny
I got that mixed
Newman.
up.
No worries. Roxanne Ford is our manager. She's amazing, but she is not able to be on this call today. Eva Osborne and I are both on this call, and Eva is our newest commercial sales rep. We're super, super excited to have her. So I think I'm going to let Eva start, and then I'm going to finish up with a couple of things. Is that okay?
Okay,
Yes.
I'll go and take it over. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Eva Osborne. Thanks, Jenny, for stepping in. First, I'd like to mention that we are happy to be a sponsor of Crew, as this is an incredible organization with strong and powerful women who paved the way in commercial real estate. As Jenny mentioned, my name's Eva Osborne, and I work at Untitled as a commercial sales rep. I'm a new member to the Crew Austin chapter, but a past member of the San Antonio chapter. I have been in commercial real estate and title since 2017 and feel lucky to be working in this industry, even during a pandemic, and with a great company, Untitled. I look forward to building relationships with all you women of Austin Crew and being involved in Crew, specifically the membership committee. So I'll let Jenny go ahead and take over and talk more about Untitled and our involvement.
Jenny, you're muted. You're still muted.
Working on it. Okay, am I there?
Yes.
I get my background to work, and then I can't even get my computer to unmute, I swear. Murphy's Law. So it was probably about 3 years ago that Untitled sponsored a golf tournament, and I was just sitting there very nicely checking people in, and Elise Giles kind of sits next to me, and all of a sudden I'm co-sponsoring a sponsorship committee. And so that was my introduction back into Crew. I had years ago gotten in with it. So Untitled, obviously I chose not just to be the chair of sponsorship committee, but I'm still on the committee and very happy and loving it, and I really enjoy Crew so much. So Untitled and I have been, I've been a part of them for 20 years now. And a couple different things about us. First, we're not just Untitled, we're actually owned by Fidelity National Title. And that's a huge deal because Fidelity is the largest underwriter in the world, meaning we have more money than all the other title companies put together. So when you are thinking about doing your transactions, insurance and how much money the company has is actually a really big deal. We pay out, you know, $1 billion a year in claims, and that is huge. So you want to make sure you're with someone that is financially sound, and that we definitely are. And I mean, we love Crew. Austin Title and Crew really go together well. So a couple of other things. One, we have a great program for all of you agents out there. It's called Prospect Now. You can buy it yourself. It's very expensive, or you're happy. We would love for you to use ours. And a great thing that Prospect Now can do for you, if you are in the commercial world and you're looking for a certain owner of a building, perhaps, and all you can find is the LLC, you can't figure out, you know, break out the owner's name from the LLC, or it's just a really big pain to. Our program will do that for you. It'll also give you their email address, their phone number, all that good stuff. If you're looking for maybe someone that owns multiple buildings in Austin, you can say, I want everybody that owns more than 3 buildings in Austin. It'll give you all of their information. It's really a great little, you know, it can spy on people almost. So that's something we've got at our disposal for you guys. And does anybody have any questions about how the title world is working? I know we're seeing the commercial side of things really kind of a little bit dying right now during this pandemic. Hopefully it'll all get back to normal again soon. Any questions that you guys have for us, or anything I can answer? Okay, well, that's pretty much it. Oh, Christy, I wanted to mention Christy Tennyson, our closer. She has been a huge part of Crew for years. She always runs the golf, or doesn't run it. She works really hard on the golf committee, I should say. And she's one that kind of pulled me and Eva in. So Christy couldn't be on the call either, but if you get a chance, use her. She's amazing. And Women Supporting Women, she is an incredibly great commercial closer, and she's a woman. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Eva. And thank you, Austin Title, for sponsoring.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank all of our sponsors as shown on the screen for supporting Crew Austin. Eventually shown on the screen. Here we go. Thank you, sponsors. At this time, I invite Kelly Cloud to introduce today's panelists. Thank you, Kelly, for coordinating today's panel.
Thank you so much. And we are so excited. Rhonda actually reached out to Stacy Armijo for me. She had a great idea. This is really going to be a great program. Stacy, thank you so much for joining us. Stacy Armijo is the Chief Experience Officer for Amplify Credit Union, which has $1.5 billion in assets under management with operations in Central Texas and members across the state for its mortgage, retail, and commercial banking offerings. We also have some Amplify Credit Union members for Crew Austin. So they're awesome. Stacy's responsibilities are fourfold. 1, marketing, communications, and social impact. 2, retail, including branches, contact center, wealth management, and consumer lending. 3, payments and operations. And 4, human resources, learning, and development. Collectively, those comprise the experience function for the credit union, which weaves together those who shape Amplify's promise to its members, employees, and community with those who keep it. Stacy is also active in leadership beyond Amplify. Currently, she's chairman of the board for the American Marketing Association nationally, a board member for communications in schools of Central Texas, the American Red Cross of Central Texas, and the Greater Austin Crime Commission, and an executive board member for the Austin Area Research Organization and the Austin Chamber of Commerce. If that's not enough, she is also a mom to 2 boys, ages 6 and 10, and a lucky wife to a stay-at-home dad, Ronnie, who makes her busy life not only possible, but fulfilling. We are so lucky to have you today. Thank you so much, Stacy. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. It is always exciting to get to have a conversation with women who are successful in their careers and in their various areas of influence. And I particularly like to talk about this topic because it is one that I think can bring together people who are really good at what they do and make them more powerful in their ability to do that. I am a believer that sometimes the best ideas don't always have the best words. And if you can give the best ideas the best words, you give them power and you give them meaning. And so that is what I'm hoping we can accomplish today. So as we dig in here a little bit, let me see if I can figure out how to advance this. Nope, it took me off. Amy, are you able to get me back to where that slide was? There we go. Okay, let's try it this way. Okay. We're starting off with a few assumptions today because influence is a pretty misunderstood idea, I find. Sometimes it is interpreted to mean manipulation, or it's interpreted to mean charisma. So I actually pulled this off Wikipedia, the source of all truth, the internet. And this is apparently the official definition of influence: the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something, or the effect itself. So you'll notice none of those words I just used, manipulation, charisma, motivation, are in those. Really, the idea of influence is to have an effect on somebody else based on the way that you do things. And so the way I think about influence is not about how to trick people into doing things that you want them to do, but rather, mostly, I think it's about avoiding things that you don't know are diminishing your influence with others, and building skills that can make you more influential. Then those are really what we're going to talk about today. And if we can go back one slide, I think we skipped past one. Let's give that a try. Doesn't look like it's wanting to respond. Amy, do you think you can click the slides for me?
You need to go back one?
Yes, back one, please. My computer is not wanting to respond very well. Perfect, thank you. So before we even start talking much about this, we're going to talk about a few assumptions. One is you do good work and you deliver a quality product. So we probably shouldn't have to say this, but we do have to say it, because being an influential person isn't about overcoming something that is lacking in substance. It's about taking something that is filled with substance and making it more powerful. So it doesn't matter how many of the tips and techniques that you might attempt to employ from this presentation today. If you don't also do good work and deliver a quality product, they're not going to make much of a difference for you. You do what you say you're going to do. These are like, the basic rules, right? But again, influence is about people being able to count on you for certain things. So if you're someone who is constantly making promises you don't keep, or over-promising and under-delivering, you are already diminishing your influence. You're honest and trustworthy. Once again, should we really have to say that? Probably not. Do we need to say that? Yes, we do, because it is important to actually to acknowledge that if you are not a person whose word I can take as true and who I know I can count on, then nothing else matters. And you're not a jerk. In fact, people kind of like you. You don't have to be, the class clown or everybody's best friend to be influential. In fact, if you attempt to be that person, you're probably diminishing your influence. But you can't be that person that people just really don't like being around because you're just unpleasant to be around. You think you have all the answers, or you think everybody else is wrong, or whatever the reason might be that somebody might say you're a jerk. If people don't want to be around you, it's pretty hard to be influential, among others. So these are really just the table stakes, but I think they're worth stating before we get into the meat of the presentation. We can click forward 2 slides, please. There we go, and one more. Thank you. So as we think about techniques, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got from some of the most influential people that I know was about how to approach conversations. So I sent an email at, 11 p.m., because that's when I usually write these presentations, to leaders I knew whose ideas seemed to always be supported. When they made an ask for budget, they tended to get it. They just seem to have the respect of the people around them. And I used to be a consultant. So before my role at Amplify as Chief Experience Officer, I spent my entire career as a public relations and marketing consultant. So I was with a firm called Pierpont Communications. And so I worked on behalf of clients on things like public relations, crisis communications, marketing strategy, social impact programs, employee engagement, kind of a wide variety of things. And so I was working at Pierpont when I sent this email, and I sent it to my clients, and I chose the clients who I felt like their ideas got supported. And because of the seat I sat in, where I had multiple clients, what I happened to know is their ideas weren't fundamentally any better than the ideas of the clients who didn't get supported. So it wasn't a quality thing, because I was aware of kind of, here's what everybody's pitching, and they all make sense, but some of them seem to go and some of them seem not to. Why is that? And so they sent back the biggest piece of advice that was cohesive across all of those clients was, the most important way that I cultivate influence with others is by understanding the bigger picture in which I operate. So I don't ever approach things just from my seat. You know, here's what I want, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm capable of articulating something that is bigger and broader, and then articulating how what I want fits into what we collectively all want. And I think that is something that's easy to skip in the way that we think about and communicate with others. And if we skip it, then we invite people too deeply into the tactics of what we want to accomplish. So if we go to the next slide, it gives some examples about ways that we can do that. So if I'm able to say, here sitting in the world of financial services, I've been sitting in this seat. This week, it'll be exactly 2 years since I took this position. And this is the first time I've worked inside a financial institution. So I walked in knowing what I don't know. I walked into this job being aware of the experiences that I don't have, that every vice president I work with has at least 10 years more experience than me. And every one of them has spent their entire careers in financial services. So I am by far the outlier of the function that I manage. Fortunately, that was on purpose, right? They hired me for a reason, is to be able to bring a different perspective. But still, what that does is that means you really have to approach positions with humility to be able to say, look, yes, I think I have something to add, and I have a lot to learn. And what I find that sounds like is rooted in some of the advice you'll see on this slide about being an advisor and not an order taker. This was advice that I gave my teams when I worked at the agency all the time, because we regularly had clients ask us for things that would not really have served their best interest. But it was our job to understand what they really needed and to source that and then to give them that. So interpret, counsel, and advise. I'm sure you guys do this in your day jobs all day, every day. People ask for certain things and they don't know how to frame a question, or you can hear the question you can hear the need underneath the question. And I find we think that it is good, it is helpful to those around us that we give them a yes, right? Okay, you asked for this, can I do this? Man, I'm gonna go get it done because I'm a go-getter and I can get it done. It doesn't matter that that's not the best way to do this or that's not what you really needed. I'm gonna go get it done. Versus, okay, I hear you asking for this. Am I understanding what you want to accomplish? And how about we do that instead? So I was, I don't know, a few weeks on the job, and our CEO said, can you work with our marketing team to create an online web form for board members, people who are interested in becoming board members for Amplify, to be able to fill out an online form to indicate their interest? And I said, well, the answer to can I is yes, that's very achievable, but let's unpack this a little. We have a 7-member board, and the average tenure of our board members runs from 10 to 30 years. So we don't add new board members very often, which means we don't have a whole ton of candidates who are seeking this. So if you think that spending a couple of dozen software development hours on this is a good return, we can do that if that's what you want to do. Or I could give you a PDF that's downloadable and you could send it by email and it could be fillable and that could accomplish the goal too. What do you think? And he said, oh yeah, that's fine. Good, let's do the PDF. And it's interesting because that's cultural, right? Like in some places, to push back on the CEO that way, and to say, I don't want to do the thing that you asked me to do would be, a career limiting choice, as the new phrase goes. In other places, that's totally acceptable. I choose to work in places that are the latter because I don't want to be a leader in an organization where that isn't the dynamic that we have across all of our teams. And that's how I tend to do my best work. So I let self-selection work itself out a bit sometimes when it comes to that, to where if that sort of interaction, a respectful interaction that speaks to the best outcome isn't a welcome conversation, then we need to have a different discussion. The discussion then isn't about whether we need a web form or not. It's about whether this is the right place for me to contribute or not. And feel free to drop in the chat if you care to. If you have any questions as we go along, I should have mentioned that. Feel free to drop them in the chat and I could answer them there. Or of course, just, feel free to unmute and ask them live as well. I'm going to go through a couple of these slides. And then as it was mentioned, we're actually going to have some breakout groups. So anybody ever heard the phrase soft opinions versus hard opinions? This is something that comes from one of my very favorite business books. It's called Multipliers. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It was formative for me in my leadership development, and I go back and read it regularly. This comes from that book, that we like to believe that as leaders, we only have one type of opinion. And it is, okay, Stacy said that she wants the countertop to be light gray instead of dark gray, and so everything must be dark gray. Whereas the reality is, Stacy had a teammate who came to her angsting over which gray we needed to choose for the cabinet. And she said, well, if you really just want my arbitrary choice, just pick that one. But really, I don't care. And so if I'm not clear as a leader who's got authority about which of those opinions I'm expressing, I have the opportunity to inspire my teams to overinterpret my point of view. So for example, at my prior place of employment, our receptionist in one of our other offices, I said something about, oh yeah, can you just FedEx that to me? Some document. And she said, oh, we don't use FedEx. We don't overnight things. I said, I'm sorry, we don't what? No, Phil said. Phil Morabito was the CEO of the agency that I worked for. And so the Phil said could have been a hashtag. Well, no, Phil said we don't send things overnight. And so of course, I pick up my phone and I text Phil and I say, did you say that we don't overnight things? And he responds, what are you talking about? Of course not. That's ridiculous. And so as it turns out, at some point years prior, there was some situation where he must have expressed what would be a soft opinion on, I don't really think we need to overnight that, that's not really necessary. What the team member heard was, we don't FedEx and overnight things. And Phil said, the CEO said, it's a mandate, right? So as a leader, I think it's important to be cognizant of those two things, because when you do have hard opinions, that makes it more meaningful for the people that you're working with. So like one of my hard opinions was, I had a really specific way that I wanted my teams to do this particular report for results that we had for our clients. It's a pretty tactical thing. And I was long since at the executive levels when I still maintained that preference. And it was unusual because they aren't used to me having such strong opinions about such specific things. And then I realized, oh, I need to communicate why I have a hard opinion about this. And the reason was, it was about when we would go out and seek media coverage on behalf of our clients. And the report was the description of the media coverage that had been secured and all these facts about it. And the reason was, if you work in the world of PR, you get a call from your client and it sounds something like this. Hey, Stacy, can you send me a list of all of the media coverage that you've gotten for me over the course of the last 6 months or so? And what's happening, one of two things just happened. My client contact just got a new boss and they're about to have to justify the budget that they spend on the agency that I'm with. Or it's budget time and they're trying to decide whether they want to resubmit that money for a budget. It's one of those two things. So in that given moment, I have a choice. I can say, sure, yeah, I can get that together for you. I'll have that over to you, in a couple of days. And then I can cobble something together that looks sort of haphazard and is missing half the clips. Or I can say, absolutely, I'll have that in your inbox in 5 minutes. And I can press print on this beautifully formatted report that indicates all of the value associated with each of those clips. And that's in their inbox before they're meeting with their boss in 30 minutes. I obviously wanted to do the latter, but it reminded me that you have to articulate the why behind some of your hard opinions in order to get people to understand why it's important. In our case, that was a really tedious process, having to keep those reports up to date, but knowing that it mattered, that they did it for an important reason, made all the difference. And then if you're consistently overruled, it's time to go. You know, so that's kind of what I mentioned before, is if you are constantly asked to do things that you don't think make sense, and then you interpret, counsel, and advise, and they say, that's lovely, go do the thing that I asked you to do, and you've used all of these other tips, that's when, you know, sometimes it's time to find another place to flourish, as they say. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Success. This is, I think, second only to understanding and defining the big picture. Creating your own definition of what success looks like is, I think, the most important aspect to being influential. So we like to assume that people know what success looks like, that you know, we're working together and we're doing this thing together, and we all know what it means to be successful. But do we? Because there's a lot of different ways that a project can be successful, or more to the point, that a project can be unsuccessful. So as we think about defining, okay, let's think forward. We're sitting down and we're having this conversation and we want to accomplish X, Y, and Z. One way I like to phrase that is, at the end of 6 months, after we've been working together and you look back on what we have accomplished, can you give me a flavor of what that looks like? And I like to just let people talk and hear what they define instinctively as success. And sometimes they don't really have a super clear idea, and maybe I do. And so instead I'll say, okay, at the end of 6 months, I think what's reasonable is X, Y, and Z. We should have accomplished this, we would have produced that result, and here's what we would be working on next. How does that compare to what you have in mind? And they might say, oh, great, yep, absolutely. Exactly what I was thinking. Or, wow, that's even more than I thought, wonderful. Or, no, I expect us to be way past. But it's super important to have that conversation early as opposed to late. So I had another client engagement. They were a robotics company, and we were doing a new business pitch. So they weren't yet a client. We were sitting down and discussing what they wanted to promote, and then thinking about, how do we figure out what this looks like. They wanted to do a video submission contest to inspire engineers to use this IP they had created, and to propose what applications there would be for this particular IP. And it was a cool idea, and we kind of talked about it, and it was interesting. They actually, the prize that they wanted to offer was a trip to space. I was like, wow. We spent the first half of our meeting with me interrogating them, trying to figure out, can you really deliver that? Because I was not going to be the person who promoted some contest for a trip to space that turned out to be, you know, some scam. But they convinced me. They were an established partner with NASA. There was all kinds of stuff, all kinds of reasons why that was possible. And I said, okay, let's talk about it. And at the end of the conversation, we said, okay, we've got this all framed up. Yes, we can do this online video submission thing. We would promote it this way. It would be great. And I said, okay, so how many videos how many video submissions would you consider a success? And he said, well, let me think about that. Because he hadn't thought about it. We often don't really think in such specific terms. He said, there's, I don't know, 1.2 million engineers in the world, and it would be a global contest. And if we got X% of them, I think if we got, you know, like 1 million submissions, that would be successful. And of course I was like, oh my God. I said, well, okay. Can I offer a different version of what I think is possible? Sure, yeah. And so I did my math in a different way. And I said, well, okay, we've done these types of contests before. What's typical is you get these kinds of entries, you get a bunch of garbage that you're going to have to throw out. So substantive entries are this many, etc. At the end of the day, if we've got 100 qualified entries for your competition, that would be considered success in our world based on what we've done before. How do you feel about that? Oh yeah, that's good. In the space of like 30 seconds, his expectation went from 1 million video submissions to 100 video submissions. No difference in the amount of time or dollars that would be invested in that project. And those were both acceptable outcomes. But can you imagine what would have happened if we had gone down the road with this project, and let's say we knocked it out of the park and we tripled the amount of submissions that we thought we could get. That would have been not a fraction of what would have made him happy without having had the conversation. So it's interesting, what I find about defining success is it's not necessarily about guessing at what's in somebody else's head or saying what you think you want success to be. It's really just about stating it and agreeing to what we think is possible and what we're aiming for. And that alone makes us feel better about what the outcome is. Let's go to the next slide. Input on strategy, autonomy on tactics. This is one of my favorite things. It's so important. I think a lot of people interpret influence in a way that is to mean autocratic. So you're the one with the answers, right? You're the one that people come to with their questions and you tell them what to do. And I believe that is the opposite of influence. If you aren't empowering people to be effective at what they do, then you're not accomplishing the right things. However, it's interesting because I tend to be a consensus-based leader, but most people confuse consensus with compromise. So consensus doesn't mean we all agreed and all of our inputs were of equal value and we arrived to the middle of what we all think. That's compromise. I would call that's like making a stew, right? You just throw everything in the pot and you stir it all around, you cook it for a while, and you get one sort of massive, monochromatically flavored result. And I love stew, nothing wrong with stew. However, if you're trying to do a good project, you're not looking for stew, you're looking for demi-glaze. If we have any cooks in the room, you might get that phrase. Demi-glaze is about reducing something down to its most essential elements. It cooks for a long time and you are extracting flavor from it. You're not just combining a bunch of things together. And so that's what I think this is about. It's about going out and getting a lot of input and a lot of people's ideas and bringing that together and understanding it and then extracting the things that are most important and then choosing the way forward that makes the most sense. Autonomy on tactics is about requiring the respect that your talent and expertise demands. So by that, what I mean is, for example, we've just finished a refresh of the value proposition behind Amplify's communications and marketing. And this has been a, I don't know, year and a half process. I think we started about 6 months after I got here. It's been a long process. We have had countless types of different input. But at the end of the day, the email that I sent to my fellow senior executives said, this is what we're doing. So I got a whole lot of input. I did a ton of research. I talked to different employees. I went to different parts of the organization to understand it. So I got a lot of input on the strategy, but when it comes to the tactics about how we're actually going to operationalize this, that is a tell, because I have to accept accountability for how effective it is or is not. And I have the expertise and the experience to be the best person to make that call. So we as leaders often have to be comfortable with that. I find sometimes when we don't stand on our own authority, it's because we're afraid of accepting the accountability, because you don't get authority without accountability. But I find I would always rather take the accountability and have the authority and tell people, I've done this to the best of my abilities. I am the right person to trust to do this. Here's why I'm doing it. Here's how I'm doing it. Are you with me? That's a different way to approach things. And I suspect, based on the fact that you all have found yourself as women in a male-dominated industry, I'm going to guess that is not something that's unique to me based on a crowd like this one. Next slide, please. Approaching people. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to go through this section kind of fast. I provided the PowerPoint to the organizers, and you all are more than welcome to have copies of it if you like. There's a lot of words on these slides, and I'm not going to read you all of these words. But if it's something that you would want to have opportunity to reference later, feel free. The point of this slide is about communication. The way that we approach people and people around us is always, it's always in context. It's always relative. So, there's me, you right in the middle. There's your manager, the other executives, your manager's manager, other people in departments, your peers, subordinates, vendors, everybody. And the way that you interact with different people in this world is, it's always affected by the way that those power dynamics work. And I state that because there is a popular notion in our world today of where we talk about sort of flat structures of organizations and egalitarian opinion, and everybody's opinion is equal. And you hear a lot of organizations that they don't have titles because they don't want anybody to be anybody's boss, that kind of thing. And that's cool if that's an organization that you work in. But I tend to continue to believe that power dynamics exist in the world, whether they're codified in titles or not. And the ability to decide if someone gets to keep a job and how much money they get to feed their family is inherently power driven. And so I try not to ignore the fact that there are dynamics among these different realms and to adapt communication accordingly. Next slide, please. So when you think about that, knowing what their get is, I think is what's important. So this actually came from a client I had. She had a background in politics, and she was fond of saying, what's their get? What's their get in this? When she would be thinking about, a particular lawmaker that they were targeting to pass a policy or to defeat a policy, what's their get? And if you go to the next stage, to the next slide, these are some examples. So get is not, somebody's get isn't, what I want is I want to see this particular outcome, or I'm trying to get that job. Maybe they are, but your get it's more intrinsic than that. Your get is about sort of what drives you. Are you an innovative person? Are you really decisive? Are you more intuitive? Do you like to be contrarian? Perhaps you're really thorough and you're very precise in how you do things, or maybe you're kind of polished and you really like to be prepared. These are just a couple of examples, but maybe you can see yourself or even, your colleagues or your clients or your bosses in these. And I find if we spend a minute thinking about what somebody else's get is, it will affect ours. So if I were putting myself on this spectrum that is this slide, I would put myself sort of around the right-hand side, more so on the kind of innovative, decisive, intuitive side, probably not quite all the way to contrarian. And if I were to think about Amplify's CEO, my boss, I would put him like on the bottom part here, like intuitive, contrarian, prepared, polished. If I were to think about the CEO who preceded him as recently as 7 months ago, he's way top left, thorough and precise, always prepared. So the way I approach our CEO today is I show up to a meeting and say, here's what I want to have happen. We should do this, we should do that, and we should do this. I don't have to give them a bunch of prep in advance. It's okay for me to talk out loud and figure out how we're going to work through something because he and I share that get. That's how we do things. For our prior CEO, I really had to work against my own preferences because I don't like to prepare things too far in advance. And so his conversations were best if you had sent something in writing a couple of days prior and you had thought through how you want to talk about it, and then we sat down together and you actually still went through it in person in the meeting, and then he had some more time to think about it, and then you would get an answer a few days later. So really different than my kind of fast-paced style. But if what I want is to understand and get support out of the executives that I work with, then I better be prepared to adapt my style in order to do that. So that's why I think it's important to understand get, and then even more so, works the same way with the rest of your teams, right? Same thing is true with your colleagues. Same thing is true with the people who report to you. We can pretend that the fact that we control somebody's job and income gets them to do things the way that you want them to do things, but anyone who's managed people knows that's not true. That what is the office space saying? If all you have is the opportunity to fire somebody, they'll work hard enough just not to get fired. So you have to use the same aspects of influence with your teams as you do with your executives. Next slide, please. So this is the part I'm not going to read you, but feel free to look at it later. So as you think about tips for communicating with executives, basically what this says is adopt a headline first style. So when I walk into a meeting with an executive, I'll say, here's what we're going to accomplish today. I recommend this. Would you like to talk about why I recommend that? And sometimes they'll say, no, I'm good with that. It's fine. Or sometimes they'll say, yeah, I'd like to understand. But what I don't do is I don't start at the beginning of the story. I don't say, I'd like to talk about this. The reason I think that we should do what we should do is point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. And here's all my background material. And now here is my conclusion. That's a novel. right? That's the format of a novel. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We want a news story. A news story has a headline, and it tells you only the most important facts. And if you don't get all the way to the end, you didn't miss most of it. If we've got anybody who has a journalism background, you'll recognize the term of the inverted pyramid. So here's a pyramid, it's inverted. That means most important things up top, and it slims down to the end. That's how I tend to communicate with executives. Next slide, please. And thank you for your question, Rhonda. Curious if your experience with new CEOs seems easier since your get is the same. Yes. So it's always easier to work with people who happen to share the same style you do. So if you sort of think through things the same way, if you operate at the same pace, then you can work through things faster. Whether that pace is fast or even if that pace is slow, it leads to a certain level of trust that is actually more built on style than on substance. So it's actually something to be cautious of. Someone who talks as fast as me, and so if I have a conversation and we have this sort of rapid fire back and forth because that just happens to be the speed at which I talk, I have to be cognizant of the fact that mentally I'm going to trust them more because I have this sort of subliminal, they must be like me. If you're like me, I can trust you. That doesn't mean I should trust them more. It just means we happen to have the same communication style. So I do find it's easier, but I actually think you should be a little bit skeptical of it. Okay, next slide, please. So as you think about framing topics for executives, these are the topics that I tend to frame them around. So the get being sort of their style, how do they think about things, but the get also being what are the issues and the topics that they're focused on, and how can I couch what I want in context of those. Next slide, please. Okay, tips for communicating with peers. You can keep it there because there's the words I won't read. What those words say is that communicating with peers, I actually think it takes one of the largest pieces of time investment because it's really focused on the WIFM. If you guys know what the WIFM is, what's in it for me? It's kind of a marketing thing. Any marketing message is rooted in the WIFM. What's in it for me? If your marketing message doesn't connect to what's in it for your audience, you're going to miss your audience and you're not going to be effective. The same thing is true when you're communicating with your peers because they don't have any natural motivation to need to work with you in the way that you might want, beyond the fact that, of course, they hope you're going to work with them in the way that they want. And I think sometimes it's negatively motivated, as in, oh, these, my peers in this group just don't, they don't really want to help each other. They want to be roadblocks to each other. But I find that's less common. What I find is more common is we all have too much to do. Like every one of us has too much on our plate. And so I want to help you and I will if I can, but I've got to prioritize the things that I'm doing. So I think the only way that is more effective is if you can find alignment between what my peer needs and what I need. And here's how we can accomplish our common needs together. I also find that it takes a lot more time that you have to get to know your peers better outside of work. Because it's harder to deal with difficult conversations with peers. I think it's hardest to deal with difficult conversations with peers because subordinates, it's kind of easy. You can sort of, it's not easy, it's not pleasant, but there's a structure, right? You can have a conversation with them about why a certain behavior or a certain outcome isn't working to the interests of their role or the interests of the organization. With your peers, it's more delicate. And so if you've built more of a relationship, you have more of an opening to do that. And what this picture is designed for, not only because I love baby pictures, none of these are my kids, but I think they're cute. This picture is designed to talk about mirroring. So it's actually what I had just mentioned about if somebody speaks in the same way you do, if they dress in the same way you do, if they have body language the same way you do, or even if they use your name a lot, that's called mirroring. So I know we have some folks here in sales. I bet you have been through a fair amount of sales training that has talked about the effect that mirroring can have. My caution to anybody with using mirroring is try not to do it on purpose. By that, what I mean is I watched people use it as a technique and they try to, they don't naturally talk as fast as I do, but they try to because they think it's gonna help us have rapport, or they've looked me up on LinkedIn. And so they start our conversation off with, hey, those Longhorns, gotta love so-and-so, whatever, like as if we're buddies, right? And we know each other, even though this is the first time we've talked and you just happen to see on LinkedIn that I went to UT. I think it super backfires. At least it does with me. I am immediately sort of put on my guard of like, we're not friends. We don't know each other. If you'd like to get to know me, that's cool. But getting to know me isn't looking at my LinkedIn profile and then pretending we're friends. That's not how we create rapport. So I would just caution you to not use it in inauthentic ways, and also to recognize how your own personal habits might be an obstacle to others. So I had one client in particular, he spoke very slowly. His natural speaking speed was literally this slow, to the point where I had to stop myself from interrupting him constantly, because I thought he'd gotten to the end of his sentence, but he hadn't. He was still in the middle of his sentence. And so like before I walked into a meeting, I would take this moment and just be like, take it down, Stace. Come on, just take it down a minute. And let's just be on the same plane. Because fast talking Stacy trying to understand a person who's speaking at their own speed doesn't work. So I wasn't being inauthentic. I was connecting with somebody at the pace of their choosing instead of mine. And I think that that's something that's a little bit different. Next slide, please. Okay, tips for subordinates. I think what this tells you is clear, consistent, frequent, and candid communication. So I've already mentioned how, the fact that you're the boss is only a little bit helpful. It's not a lot helpful. And I think your biggest risk in communicating with your subordinates is that they actually overinterpret what you say. So I try to be really cognizant of, if I'm really just offering an idea, I'll say something like, feel free to ignore this, but consider this idea. Because what people are used to is when a boss says, well, consider maybe doing it like this. They've worked for a lot of bosses for whom that was code, that was do it this way. That's actually what the boss meant. But what they said was, consider doing it like this. And if I use phrasing like, consider doing it like this, I actually mean, just consider it. But if you have a better idea, I'm totally open to that. If I really want you to do it a certain way, I'm going to tell you, do it a certain way, and I'll explain to you why. But one thing I think we have to remember is we are often not the first boss of the employees that we manage. I think we're probably rarely the first boss of any employee that we manage. And so you have inherited whatever default settings their first boss has created for them. My theory in terms of leadership development is that the first couple of years of our career are very formative for us. And so we sort of like imprint about what the professional world needs from us. So whatever your very first boss was good at, people tend to think everybody's good at that. And whatever your very first boss was bad at, people tend to be on watch for that all the time. And so if your employees previously had a super passive aggressive boss, they're going to assume that you didn't really mean it when you told them they did good work on that project. They're just waiting for you to say, but next time, can you do this? Because that's what their last boss used to do, whatever the case might be. So just be cognizant of the context for the team members that you work with, and make sure that the way that you're interacting with them is the way that they're actually hearing it. And that takes a lot of work. Next slide, please. Delegation pitfalls to avoid. So when you are working with your team members, and I know we're an experienced group in this area, so I'm going to guess that not a lot of folks in this crowd make these mistakes, but I find that I appreciate being reminded of them from time to time, so you might as well. The way that we delegate, one size does not fit all. And so understanding that we shouldn't delegate based on how we delegate. We should delegate based on how our team members receive and react to that delegation. So I've got some team members who I can sort of toss them an idea or even like give them a challenge. It's like with my kids, right? Where you're like, I bet you can't do that. Yeah. And they're like, oh yeah, I can do it. Yeah. It's like, sometimes that's, the way to delegate and inspire to others. Other people, they want really specific guidance and direction. And so are you prepared to do that? I really struggled with that's not how I would do it especially when I was an early manager. That was, I actually had to really sort of extract myself from the process a bit, because I had that false notion that many first-time managers have, which is well, I was promoted because the way I did things was good. And so it must be my job to help other people do things the way I did things. And I needed somebody to explain to me, no, you got promoted because the outcomes you produced were valuable. And so your job is to help other people produce valuable outcomes, not to have them do it the way you did it. And so that, you know, it's subtle but profound. The compliment sandwich. Anybody ever gotten a compliment sandwich? Let me tell you what it sounds like. Stacy, wow, thank you so much for putting this report together. You did such a great job. Oh my gosh, it is so good. I am gonna have to redo all of it, but thank you so much. It was just so great. So walking away from a conversation like that, Stacy is understandably confused because it sounded like a good thing, but really it wasn't a good thing. And the only reason that feedback was being delivered to me is because we really needed to say a bad thing. Yep, first boss, there you go. Well, and it's interesting because there's people who advocate the compliment sandwich, and their idea is there's always something good to acknowledge in somebody's work, and you don't want to make people feel bad, and so tell them nice things so that they feel good, and then they're ready to hear a bad thing. Over time, though, what ends up happening, and Beverly, you can tell me if this is true or not, is you stop hearing the good things, because a compliment sandwich conditions you that you're only telling me a good thing so that you can tell me a bad thing. And it's, as you think about the way that we react to certain things, we desperately need our team members to hear the sincere and authentic good things we say, because that's what we want them to replicate. So if the way we're engaging with them is keeping them from being able to hear that, then we're really defeating our own purpose. So I think a better way to do that, as Rhonda says, leave the sandwich out of it, absolutely. You've got to be really good at delivering honest, authentic, positive feedback regularly. So just not the great job, thanks. I mean, those are nice, but the great job on this. I really appreciate specifically how you did that extra piece of research and you called out this thing. It really changed the overall arc of this story. It made a big difference. I'm specific and I'm giving you something to replicate next time. So I'm making that positive feedback actionable. And if you do that about 3 times to everyone, so as in 3 pieces of positive feedback, and then the next time I come and say, look, this missed the mark. I had a conversation like that with one of my team members last week. She was doing a new project she hadn't done before, and she put time into it, but it missed the mark. And so instead of saying, oh, I love this and I love that, I said, look, we need to revisit this. It missed the mark. I know you put a lot of work into it, and I appreciate that. Let's talk about how we can make this a better delivery. So there's a way that you can make it positive, effective, without necessarily having to have it as a sandwich. Yes, and these hard conversations, Vanessa, are very challenging, and they take a lot of courage to deliver. If we have time, I'd be happy to share with you guys SBI, Situation Behavior Impact. That's the framework that I use to have these kinds of conversations. It comes from the Center for Creative Leadership, and I find it really helpful. So I'm going to talk even faster because I know coming up in about 9 minutes is when we want to break into the breakout groups. So I want to get through as much as we can. Last minute timing, I am terrible about this in terms of delegating. You know, it's not fair to toss something to somebody at the last minute and then have them give it back to you. You haven't really given them the time to do their best work, and don't put them in that situation. Overdoing the check-ins. So you delegated a project and it's not due until next Wednesday. And every day in between, there's a check-in of how's that coming? How's that coming? What that really tells your team member is not, I'm here to support you, which I think is what we mean to say. What it actually says is, I don't trust that you're on it. That's what people tend to hear. So be cognizant of like maybe one check-in to be helpful, but don't overdo it or else you'll diminish the trust between you and your teammate. And then delegating unconsciously. So this was another mistake that I made as an early manager. I would delegate because I didn't have time to do things. So my delegation sounded something like, hey, Sally, do you think you could take over this coverage report for this client? I know it's a pain and we really hate pulling all those clips, but I really just don't have time. Could you do me a favor and handle it? Or I could say, hey, Sally, I know you haven't done a coverage report before, but it's one of the things that people in the position after yours have the opportunity to do. Would you be interested in learning how to do it? I'd be happy to let you take a go at this one. Those things are both true. Both of those statements are true, but one of them made your team member feel valued, made them feel like you saw potential in them, And the other one made them feel like you're dumping ground for the work that you didn't want to have. And now again, be sincere. Don't say that to somebody that you don't think has the potential to move into the next role and that you don't really respect. People are going to see through that a mile a minute. But if you really do feel that way, just don't let the momentum of your busyness lead you toward the dumping ground approach instead of the investing approach. Next slide, please. Reacting to criticism. Oh my gosh, this is so important. I think this is important for every professional at every level. It just becomes even more, it's important to form positive habits and skills when you're earlier in your career. And I find it is necessary to invite it a lot more specifically as you get more experienced in your career. So people who are more junior in an organization get lots of criticism and lots of feedback. The more senior you become, what I have found is my jokes get funnier the higher my titles get. And I'm pretty sure I don't just become funnier based on my years of experience here in the world. I also find, apparently, I am worthy of less criticism. I'm guessing that's also not true. I'm guessing that I am worthy of just as much criticism today as I was 20 years ago. But I don't get as much criticism. So if I want it, if I want that feedback, I have to ask for it and I have to invite it in really specific ways. So when people do come to me with feedback, with negative feedback, the most important thing is to express gratitude and avoid defensiveness. I had a super painful experience with this not that long ago, just a couple of years ago. And I had one of my teammates back at the agency. I had been traveling a lot, and the agency environment is one where when you're in a senior leadership role, you're not really in the office all that much. You're kind of out and about at clients and new business pitches, that kind of thing. So time in the office was already a little bit rare, and it had become even more so based on some of the community leadership things I was doing. So I kind of knew I'm not connected enough to my team at the office I really need to be. And so I was coming back from a business trip, and it was a Friday afternoon. I flew into the ABIA at like 4:30 or something. And so normally I would have just gone home, but I was like, okay, I really need to show my face at the office. And so I dragged my sorry, tired self over to the office. And as I was walking into my office, I said hi to folks. I had a team member follow me into my office. I was like, oh, this is weird. Yeah. And she said, hey, I actually talk to you for a second. I'm like, okay. Of course, my first instinct was, oh my God, she's resigning. Because that's, immediately what people think. But that wasn't it. She said, when you get to your email, you're going to see an email from me. And that is because I didn't think I was going to see you today. And it says that I feel like you've been gone too much, and I need you to be more present in the work that we're doing, and I need you to be here. And since you are here, I didn't want you to read it without me telling you. Yeah, which I was like, okay, well, thanks. I appreciate you saying that. And she went on to explain why she felt that way. And I just sort of listened, and I just didn't really say much. And what I eventually said was, thank you so much for telling me this. Can we talk about this on Monday? And she said, yeah, absolutely. Because what I wanted to say was, do you know how tired I am? This is hour 70 of my week, and I just got my butt off a plane. I was up at 3:30 this morning. Yeah, like whatever. I wanted to give my sob story about how tired I was and how hard I was working and whatnot. But fortunately, I had the peace of mind to restrain that impulse and just to say thank you and wait until we had a moment to be able to reflect on it in calmer times. Because if I had done that, if I had let my instinct come through, that is the only time that I remember a subordinate ever sort of directly criticizing me for something, saying like, you're doing something wrong or something that I don't agree with. And she was right, which is why it was so painful. But if I had done anything except express gratitude for the feedback, that word would have gotten out to everybody else that we work with, and nobody would ever come to me with an honest opinion again. And I need their honest opinions because I need to know when I'm coming off the rails, or at least when they think I'm coming off the rails. That doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but it does mean I have to want to hear them. So when that does happen, don't explain why you did what you did, but instead explore what their version of success looks like through clarifying questions. So basically what we ended up doing on Monday when calmer heads were prevailing is saying, okay, you're right. Here's my plan for how I think I want to be around more, but here are my other obligations to the agency. And this is what people are counting on me for. What ideas do you have for how I can navigate those? So where we landed was, I think, something less than what she had in mind, but she understood why we landed where we landed, and we could feel better about that. Be receptive and inviting, but don't be an apologist. So you don't have to immediately say, just because you criticize me, you must be right, and I'm going to agree with you so that I can get more feedback. I don't have to pretend to think you're right if I'm not, but I also don't have to make it a point to say you're wrong. That's what the idea about looking forward is about, is to say, I don't have to agree or disagree with where we are today, but let's focus on what we should do next. I'm actually finding a lot of the conversations in organizations that I'm part of now around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the events of the last couple of months, they're getting hung up there. Like, do we need to talk about who's right and who's wrong, or what came before? And we're going to have one conversation there, or is it okay that we just talk about what needs to happen next? Because there's a lot more agreement about what needs to happen next than there is about what has come before. Incorporate the feedback and never repeat the same mistake twice. That's an expectation I set with my teams, and so it's an expectation I need to have. My rule is a first mistake is only an opportunity to learn, always. A second mistake is unacceptable. So the idea of creating fast learning cycles is inherent within that. Next slide, please. Developing skills. Okay, next slide. Couple of things that can help you as we're rounding the curve of influence. Less is more. As in, fewer words equal more meaning. I really struggled with this. I was once a person who could not stop talking to save my life. Perhaps you're saying, past tense, really? Yeah. So in real world circumstances where I'm not presenting a presentation, I really try to be more focused on questions than answers. And I've actually cultivated a speaking style that is relatively concise, because I would actually notice I would lose people's attention when I would be giving answers to questions, or I'd be talking. And I kind of noticed that, like you notice people's, their eye contact fade or whatever. And so I started paying close attention to that. And when I noticed that happening, I just stopped talking. I didn't literally stop mid-sentence, but I would find a way to put a period at the end of whatever thought I was on right then, instead of finishing whatever it was I was talking about. And it was interesting because people tended to react. Obviously I had conditioned them to expect something particular. And then when I behaved in a way that they didn't expect, it sort of got their attention. And then what I realized after doing that a few times is I had already made my point. I didn't really have something else to say. I was just justifying the point I had made. And so over time, I sort of conditioned myself to do that more and more. And I think it's a big asset for me now, of being able to communicate in a way that's clear and concise. And I find people listen to what I say a lot more. Next slide. Public speaking. If you don't love it, learn to love it. So doing something like this, just think, I don't know most of the people on this call. And now we've had an interaction and I've had an opportunity to learn from you. And hopefully we will be able to interact after this. So this is one way that my influence is growing, but I only get this opportunity because I'm in front of you doing a public speaking thing. Also, if you want to be sitting in the seat of influence where you get to control dollars and all those sorts of things, getting comfortable standing up in front of a room is pretty important. I cannot count the number of boards of directors I've stood in front of and given presentations about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And here's this budget request, and here's that issue we're working through, and you should say this statement, whatever the case might be. So I am one of those fortunate few who doesn't get nervous standing up on a stage doing things. But even if you are, work on it, spend the time, put yourself in situations where you have to do it, because it is so important for your growth. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox of public speaking. Next slide, please. That's a great question. That is my very favorite thing to hear after I ask a question. I believe that knowledge is best expressed in questions. And when someone says, that's a great question, what they really mean is, wow, you really understood that in a way I didn't expect. And that means that we're having the right conversation. So aim for interactions that are less about being impressive or saying the right thing, and more about thinking through what is the right way to think about this and asking really good questions. Not questions to be impressive, questions to be exploratory. Next slide, please. Cast a wide net. You guys are already doing it. The fact that you're here, the fact that you're involved in Crew and probably other organizations as well, means you're already bought into this concept. But I find people that get real focused on just, okay, here's my day job, and I just go in and I do my day job, or maybe even they work with really large organizations. Like I would hear this a lot from people that worked at Dell of, oh, well, you know, I do all my Dell networking. I'm like, okay, well, I understand Dell's a big place, but it's just one company. So if your whole network is around people who subscribe to the same philosophy of leadership, the same hierarchy, etc., even if it's a very large organization, you aren't really casting your net that wide, either in terms of connections or in terms of mindset. So I strongly encourage people to cast wide nets, because that's where I've done a lot of the best learning that I've had. Next slide. Get to yes. This is, so being influential, I find, is a lot about finding a way to say yes to things that might not have been on your plate to begin with. So a lot of the coolest community involvement things that I've done are things that I did not know existed and I never would have known to ask for. So especially as women, we talk a lot about being intentional. We talk about be intentional, you know, have a career path, have goals, like basically create your own future. And I definitely think there's a lot of value to that. I do personal goal planning and such. But I am not a fan of being really rigid about, okay, here's my career plan. I want this job, and then I want that job, and then I want this job. I want to work at that company. I want to be on this nonprofit, whatever. Because that means you only know to ask for things that are within your realm of awareness and experience already. And you're going to miss a lot if that's all you're open to. So be open to things that are broader, and you might be surprised what you get. Next slide. Cautions, next one. This last piece is very quick. Next slide. Don't compromise. What are those 4 things we talked about at the top of the presentation? You deliver a quality product, you're honest and trustworthy, you're not a jerk. Don't forget all of that. So these are all tips and techniques, and they're helpful, but none of them matter if you compromise on those things. Next slide. Stand out from the crowd. This is one of my favorite things. This is not hard for any of you all. Because you work in an industry where besides this group, you probably stand out in the crowd in a whole lot of ways. So you don't have to work at it so much, but I speak to some other groups where they're very fond of finding people who are just like them, right? That, okay, I want to find somebody who is my age, in my profession, my race, with my hobbies and interests. That's who I want to hang out with. And that's cool if what you're looking for is a sense of belonging. Yeah, and that can help you, but don't restrict yourself to that. I am usually the youngest person in the room, often the only woman in the room of the various rooms that I've been in. And the vast majority of the time, I have found that to be to my advantage. I find that I actually get more attention. People ask my opinion more because I am different from most of the other people in the room. So I would encourage you not to be afraid of that and to take advantage of it. Next slide. Avoid do-it-yourself disease. You cannot have much influence if you can't trust others to do things and if you can't equip others to do things. So just a reminder on not becoming one of those people if you're not already, or if you find you have some of those tendencies, as I once did, attempt to work against them. Next slide. This is for any folks out there who might be like me, who are, like I used to say, I'm not a math person, that's why I'm in communications. I used to say things like that. And what I then learned was, 1, I'm better at math than I give myself credit for. And 2, the budget follows people who can follow the budget. So if you say, oh, I'm not a math person, so, but just come to me for the words, don't come to me for the numbers. And I'm sure based on the professions you've all chosen, this probably isn't true for you, or I hope not, but maybe there's some other corollary that you find yourself doing of, oh, well, no, I'm not good at that. You got to go to somebody else for that. I just do this. Don't be self-limiting that way, because building skills is not as hard as you would think. And we were chatting before this all started about the power of Google and how it can teach you next to anything. Don't limit yourself because you're probably better at it than you think you are. Next slide. I think that's the last one. It is. So I think the plan for now, thank you, Lynn. Sorry you have to drop off. I believe the plan for now is that we're going to break out into breakout groups. And the idea is that you would have small group discussions. And I think the idea is we'll talk about one question. And that question is, what have you heard today that surprised you, or that made you maybe recognize a habit that you have, or a mindset that you have that might be working against your own personal influence? or maybe some tips or techniques that you want to try from today's presentation. So I think the system is going to break us out. Is that right?
Yep, I'm working on that right now.
Cool. And I'll drop that into the chat in case. Oh, and we will come back together. We'll pull the group in back together, I think at 12:45. So you've got about, or I'm sorry, 12:55. So you've got about 10 minutes in the discussion groups. And then we'll actually ask a rep from each group to give us, 30 seconds on the highlights of what you discussed in your group. So, oh, hi, Laura. Laura Zelke, one of my favorite teammates.
It's giving me some fits here. Hold on.
Okay.
And it is much, much better whenever you, if we can see your video, just so you know.
True.
I have one person, it's not letting me, hold on. Let me go over here real quick.
Beverly, as it happens, the teammate I was mentioning who called me on my crap, it was Laura Zelke. That's who it was.
That does not surprise me about Laura.
Exactly.
She's done similar things for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right.
All right.
When you can take that feedback, it's really good.
Move her over to break room 2. Okay. Wow. Okay, hold on. Move to. Just moving y'all around a little bit here so that I don't have too many in one. Okay, here we go. Y'all ready? And it gave you 10 minutes and it's going to give you a countdown. All right, here we go.